last week we did the first two big chunks of Daniel 7. We looked at Daniel's 4 beasts, and we were really focusing on how Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts correspond to Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2. And so we made those associations. We talked about some other possible interpretations of the 4 beasts of Daniel representing modern. But because the connections of the details of Daniel's beasts are so strongly correlated with the statue in Daniel 2, and because those kingdoms are recognized by the Bible, it's very likely we've got a strong case for the fact that Daniel 7 is really just a retelling of the timeline presented in Daniel chapter 2. And we have 2 testimonies of the same story. And we know that whenever something is repeated twice in the Bible, that means that it is a sure, sealed, and done deal, like Pharaoh's 2 dreams that Joseph interpreted, like the mene, mene, the repetition of that phrase in Daniel chapter 5. So that's what we looked at last week. So let me just briefly review this. Tonight, we're going to focus on Daniel's 4th beast. So we looked at Daniel's first beast. It was like a lion. It had eagle's wings. The eagle's wings were torn off, and the lion stands on its feet, and it's given the heart of the man. And we compared this to Nebuchadnezzar's experience going out into the wilderness, living like a beast. His hair grew like eagle's feathers, and his nails grew like eagle's claws or a bird's talons. But after living like a beast, his kingdom was restored, his humanity was restored, and his majesty was restored, just like the lion being given the heart of a man and standing on its feet. So for those reasons, we associated the first beast with the head of gold, which
I'm tired of trying to do it. It ain't working.
him, right?
Tried it 100 times.
Hold on just a second.
See?
If
The
y'all
Zoom meeting
don't
went
mute
right
your
there.
microphones,
Mute it.
unless you want to say something, I'm getting a lot of
Okay.
background noise here.
Yeah, somebody's talking there.
No.
There we go. Okay. So then the second beast that Daniel has a vision of is like a bear raised up on one side, and it's got 3 ribs in its mouth. It's ferocious, and it says, arise and devour much flesh. So because of the fact that it's raised up on one side, it's asymmetric, but very, very powerful, even though in a clumsy way, we associated the bear with the chest and arms of silver. There's 2 arms on that part of the statue, one being stronger than the other, just like the bear raised up on one side, got one side stronger than the other. So we looked at the bear as representing Medo-Persia. Then the third beast was like a leopard, but it had the 4 wings of a fowl and 4 heads. And we corresponded this with Greece from Nebuchadnezzar's statue. The wings simply mean that it's a very swift beast, and we know Alexander the Great came and swept to the east very quickly and conquered much territory in a very short amount of time. And when he passed away, his kingdom was divided up amongst his 4 generals to the north, south, east, and west. And so that corresponds to the 4 heads of the leopard. And then there was the 4th beast, right? The 4th beast was so undescribable that there was no animal that Daniel compared it to. And this is going to be our focus tonight, really learning about that 4th beast. Daniel was very curious about the 4th beast, and he asks questions about it. So the passage that we read tonight is going to give us more information about this 4th beast. So far, we know that it was ferocious, it had iron teeth, it had 10 horns, and we're told that there was a little horn that arose, uproots 3 horns, and this little horn has the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things. So again, we coordinated that 4th beast, specifically the 10 horns. The iron teeth correspond to the legs of iron, and the 10 horns correspond to the 10 toes. So we were looking at 2 phases of that final kingdom. So again, we can see correspondences there. So our focus tonight is this 4th beast. So we're going to read the rest of Daniel in a couple of different passages here, starting with verses 15 through 18. So I'm going to switch over to Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to read verses 15 through 18. So if you would like to read, you can turn on your microphone and read that first paragraph here, or you can read from the version that you have in your Bible. Anyone want to read?
I will if you like.
Okay, that'd be awesome, Jeanette. Thank you.
Okay. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are four in number, are four kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come.
Okay, thanks for reading. So that little passage is what I'm calling the short version. So Daniel turns to someone standing by. And so let's pause right there. Daniel is having a night vision and he turns and he asks someone that stood by. So what in the world does that mean and who is he talking to? If you'll remember, the passage just before this was the vision of the heavenly courtroom. Remember, we saw the Ancient of Days on his throne. His wheels were all ablaze. There was a fiery stream issuing from the throne, and the Son of Man approaches the Ancient of Days. And so we were talking about two persons of the Trinity being revealed here in Daniel chapter 7, and specifically the importance of the Son of Man as a title for Christ. And it's unique there in Daniel 7. And we're also told in that passage before what we just read that there were thousands of thousands attending unto this courtroom. So Daniel turns to one of the thousands standing by who knew what was going on. We can assume maybe it was an angel, maybe it was someone who was there with Daniel revealing this vision to him. Daniel's going to have several visitations of angels, and asks him this question: what in the world is all of this about? And so again, I call this the short version. The one that is standing by basically says, okay, there's going to be four kings, but in the end, we win. That's essentially what he reveals to Daniel. So the interpreter says that the four beasts that Daniel has just seen are four kings which arise from the earth. Okay, four kings are the four beasts. Now, my question here is, do these four beasts, when we really focus and look at the granular details, do the four beasts represent individuals, kings, or do they represent a collective kingdom? And I think the answer is both. Okay, if we compare verse 17, if we look in verse 17, the interpreter says, these great beasts which are four kings. Okay, so in particular, those four beasts represent kings. But when we come down here to verse 23, he's going to say, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth. And so in this entire passage, we can see that the beasts represent singular kings, but also their collective kingdoms. And that's important because we're going to attempt to interpret that fourth beast. So the way we can think about this is that the power of a kingdom is concentrated singularly into its king. If we think about the head of gold from Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we know that Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, thou art that head of gold, but we also know that head of gold represents the entire kingdom of Babylon. So in all four of these beasts, they point to an empire or a kingdom, but the power of that empire is concentrated into a singular king. That's going to help us to understand the little horn that's coming up soon. Though these beasts are ferocious and terrible, especially this fourth beast, the fourth beast is the one that troubled Daniel so much. The bystander talking to Daniel, angelic or whoever it is, says and reassures him the saints of the Most High will take the kingdom and possess it forever. So again, this bystander reveals to Daniel the short version. There's going to be four kings, and then the saints are going to take the kingdom forever and ever. So that's the summary, but we're going to get a little bit more detail on that fourth beast. Okay, so any questions so far or comments? Everybody good? Okay, I'm going to switch back over to the Bible and we're going to read verses 19 through 22. So, this next paragraph here, and we're going to get a few more details from this description than we did from the description last week. So, would someone like to turn their mic on and read verses 19 to 22?
Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped when when was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head. And the other horn came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and the judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for reading. So, again, it's a similar description of what we learned last week, but we get a few more details. So, Daniel is troubled by the fourth beast. Okay, remember we talked about in a group of 4, a lot of times the first 3 are similar, but the fourth one is set apart. That's the case here. Daniel's not asking about the first 3 beasts. He wants to know the mystery of the fourth beast. So we are told that this fourth beast is exceeding dreadful. He has great iron teeth. We learned that last week. But we're also told that he has nails of brass or of bronze, claws of bronze or nails of brass, depending on which translation you read. So that's new, right? Last week we were associating the iron teeth with the legs of iron, but now we're told that it has claws of bronze or nails of brass, and that reminds us of the belly and thighs of brass. So this fourth kingdom has elements of the legs and the belly and thighs from Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Last week, we talked about the passage that said the beasts were, their lives were prolonged for a little while. So we can see the previous kingdoms surviving in this fourth beast. Okay, and we're going to see that extend all the way to Revelation as well. We're told in that passage that it's stamped with its feet. So its feet are pointed out, right? And the important thing about Nebuchadnezzar's statue were the feet that were composed of iron mixed with clay. And those feet, if you'll recall, had 10 toes, right? Another detail that is important about this fourth beast is that it has 10 horns. So once again, the 10 horns of the fourth beast correspond to the 10 toes of iron mixed with clay from Nebuchadnezzar's statue. So there's so many correlations between the beast and the statue that we can say the Bible is probably interpreting itself. Daniel 2 is interpreting Daniel 7, and Daniel 7 is interpreting Daniel 2. But what is new from the fourth beast is that there is a little horn that's pointed out that rises and uproots 3. Okay, so there's 10 horns altogether. 3 of them are going to be plucked up by the roots. That leaves 7 behind. And then the little horn rises up. So that's a total of 8. Okay. That little horn has the eyes of a man, and it's given a mouth speaking great things. And this little horn is more stout than its fellows. So it's called the little horn, but it's more stout than its fellows. So it's like the little guy, the big guy in a little coat kind of deal. So once again, we see the power of this beast being concentrated into this little horn, just like the power of a kingdom is concentrated in its king. So this fourth beast represents the end times empire, but the power of that empire will be concentrated in this little horn with the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great and blasphemous things. This little horn makes war with the saints. And what's amazing is that he prevails over the saints. He is successful. He is victorious. He tramples, he stamps, and has success and wears out the saints. So this fourth beast is the final kingdom before the judgment that we saw in Daniel 7, and also the fourth or the last kingdom before that rock not cut out with human hands representing Christ's millennial kingdom comes to the earth. Okay, so again, for that reason, because the timeline stretches from Nebuchadnezzar all the way to the rock, I don't think that those beasts represent modern nations, although it's a really interesting and compelling interpretation that we talked about last week. So those are the details of the fourth beast, okay? And every detail is important, and it's going to be repeated in Daniel 8. It's going to be repeated in Daniel 11, then Revelation 12, 13, and 17. So if we know all those details, we can see how they correspond with other testimonies about this same time period. So Daniel is concerned about the fourth beast. He wants to know, what does it mean? And so we're going to go back to the Bible and read verses 23 to the end of the chapter. So we're really not covering too many scriptures tonight, but it's a lot of deep and dense detail. So back to Daniel chapter 7. I need a reader from 23 to the end of the chapter. Anybody ready?
I can.
Okay, Pamela, go for it.
Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them. And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time, and times the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart.
Okay, thanks for reading. So that is the end of Daniel 7. So let's make sure that we understand all of the details. So in verse 23, we know that this fourth beast is diverse from the rest. He's different from the ones that came before. And previously in our class, we considered the possibility that the feet of iron mixed with clay from Nebuchadnezzar's statue might possibly correspond to an end time Islamic caliphate. So keep that in your mind, especially as we talk about the passages from Revelation. If the Islamic interpretation pans out, if that's correct, we know that that kingdom is diverse from the kingdoms that came before. It's different from Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, for sure. It's distinct. The Islamic Caliphate is oppressive. It is militaristic. We know that it is murderous for infidels, and it is blasphemous. In the mosque on the Temple Mount, there is a passage that says that Allah is God and he has no son. And John tells us that the one who denies the Father and the Son is Antichrist. He is against Christ. And so this last kingdom will be blasphemous and different from the ones that came before. The fourth beast is going to tread down, stamp upon, and devour the whole earth. So that gives us a military interpretation. This last beast is going to be very strong. It's going to conquer much territory, as we're going to see in Daniel 11. It's going to be militaristic, and if you look at, there's a really interesting article that I found today. It's called The Biggest Armies in the World, Ranked by Active Military Personnel 2020. And it's really interesting to look at. China is the biggest, then comes India. And those are the kings of the East that are mentioned in Revelation 13. But if we work our way down the list, USA is on there. And then Second to the USA in NATO is Turkey. And we were talking about how important Turkey is in looking at reviving the Islamic Caliphate and what they did with the Hagia Sophia, converting that church into a mosque very publicly, showing that they are a religious state, or looking again to revive that Islamic Caliphate. So that's really interesting to consider those things. And Turkey has a very powerful military. If you look at that list, and I had it opened, I'm not going to take the time to open it now, but Israel doesn't appear anywhere on the list. Their army is so small, when measured with active duty military men and women, that it's totally negligible in the world. But we know that God is on the side of Israel, and God will defend Israel, and that is all that they need. So again, looking at further associations between Daniel's fourth beast and the feet of Nebuchadnezzar's statue from Daniel 2, once again, the fourth beast has 10 horns, and that's reminiscent of the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's statue in Daniel 2. Okay. In verse 24, we are told that the 10 kings, or I'm sorry, the 10 horns are 10 kings. So the Bible here tells us what to interpret. The 10 horns are 10 kings that shall arise. Okay, so if we're looking at this fourth beast representing just a king, how do 4 kings arise out of a single king? Okay, so again, this fourth beast represents the kingdom, the power, the empire, and then from that empire, we've got 10 distinct kings that will arise. Once again, 3 will be uprooted, and that little horn again will finally arise towards the end of the power of this fourth beast. Now, the little horn uproots 3. Okay, so when we get to Daniel 11, that's a pretty tough chapter if you've read ahead. A lot of details there, difficult to interpret in my opinion. But towards the end of Daniel 11, we're going to read about the king of the north. Okay, the king of the north is associated with Gog. Gog comes from the far north. If you're familiar with Ezekiel 37, 38, and 39, the Gog-Magog war. But there is a king of the north that is identified in Daniel 11 who has a lot of similar characteristics to the little horn that we're studying here. And it's interesting in Daniel 11 verses 40 to 43 that this king of the north subdues 3 nations. Okay, now Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Okay, so this is modern day Jordan, just south of Jordan. They will escape this king of the north, again, who's associated with the little horn. Eventually, we're going to see this is the Antichrist. But it says in verse 42, the land of Egypt shall not escape. And in verse 43, the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps, or other translations say that they will be submissive to him. So what we see in Daniel 11 is this king of the north, which we'll see has many characteristics like this little horn, is subduing 3 nations, Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia, or modern day Sudan. And Sudan's been in the news making a deal with Israel lately, so that's really interesting how that's all going to play out. But the king of the north subdues 3 nations, Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. And that corresponds to what we're learning here. This little horn uproots 3 kings and subdues them. And that's what we see in the pattern of Daniel 11. A lot of things are repeated in Daniel, and that's a good thing because it takes us a while for all of that to sink in. Now, in verse 25, if we go back to our scripture here, in verse 25, this little horn shall speak great words against the Most High. Okay, when you speak words against the Most High, of course, is God the Father. When you speak against the Most High, that's essentially blasphemy. And we read about the beast in Revelation, it has blasphemous names and it speaks blasphemy. So this little horn is speaking blasphemy against God. And we're told in that same verse that he wears out the saints. He's going to prevail over them. He will have victory over the saints, but we know it's only for a little while. That's why the bystander told Daniel the short version. Remember, he said there's going to be 4 kings, but the saints are going to win because there's going to be a really difficult, terrible time before the end comes, before the saints take the kingdom. Now, there's a passage in Revelation 12 when the dragon, the devil, Satan, is cast out of heaven. When he is permanently cast out of heaven, there is this massive celebration that goes on in heaven, this relief, because the one who was constantly accusing the people of God is finally gone. His darkness is gone, his accusations, all of the trouble that he stirred up is finally nowhere to be found. And there's this great relief that occurs, because that devil, that serpent, Satan, is constantly antagonizing God's people, constantly accusing, stirring up trouble. And that Antichrist spirit causing trouble for God's people is already in the world. John tells us that the Antichrist spirit is already here, even though the Antichrist is not here. And sometimes that spirit comes out in people. People are accusing, complaining, criticizing, causing trouble, stirring up trouble. That's the spirit of Antichrist. When that spirit is finally removed from the earth and from people, it's going to be a magnificent relief. The saints of the Most High eventually will take the kingdom and be victorious. But until then, the little horn will prevail and have victory for a little while. Now, in Daniel 8, which we'll talk about next week, we're going to read about another little horn. It doesn't come from the fourth beast, it's going to come from a goat. But there's a lot of clear associations between the little horn that we're learning on the fourth beast and the little horn that's going to arise out of the he-goat next week. And we'll read about that next week, but I'm just going to give you a heads up. So it's also called a little horn. And we're going to hear that it stamps upon them with its feet, just like the fourth beast was stamping upon the saints of the Most High. And this little horn, which comes out of the he-goat, magnifies himself even to the prince of the host. Now, the phrase for prince of the host there is the same phrase that's used for the captain of the host that Joshua sees before he enters Jericho, and he sees the magnificent soldier standing there with drawn sword, and he tells Joshua, take off your shoes, you're standing on holy ground. So essentially, this little horn magnifies himself to the captain, which is Jesus Christ himself. So he's magnifying himself. Remember, the little horn on this beast was speaking great things. He was more stout than his fellows. And by him, the daily sacrifice was taken away. That's going to be a really important detail also as it relates to Daniel's 70 weeks. It cast truth to the ground, and it practiced, and it prospered. So the little horn on Daniel's fourth beast gets victory over the saints for a little while. The little horn of the he-goat next week, same stuff, right? He's magnifying himself even to the prince of the host, and he's going to cast truth to the ground, and he's going to prosper. He's going to do well. He's going to be victorious for a little while. And so this sickens Daniel, and this is why this fourth beast is so dreadful. Now, in that same passage, verse 25, we're told that the little horn changes times and laws. So what in the world does that mean? If this is the Antichrist, this little horn is the Antichrist with the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking boastful and blasphemous things, what does it mean that he changes times and laws? Well, we've already heard that passage in Daniel chapter 2, verse 21. Daniel, remember, he was interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great metal statue. But before he gives them the revelation of the dream, he lets him know that he, God, is the one that changes the times and seasons, and he removes kings and sets up kings. So before Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar what all the different pieces of the statue mean, he says God is the one that changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. And we know that the interpretation of the dream was how the kingdoms of the world will change over time, to go from Babylon to Medo-Persia to Greece, Rome, and then to the feet and 10 toes. God is the one that changes times and season, removes kings and sets up kings. So this little horn is going to attempt to change times and laws. He's trying to put himself in the place of God. Only God can set up kings and change the times and seasons. But this little horn is going to attempt to do the same thing. He's going to attempt to establish his kingdom over the earth and over God's people. We are told in that passage that the little horn will prevail over the saints, but his time is finite. It's limited. It's called a time, times, and half a time. Okay, so it's kind of a strange version. I remember reading that when I was little, thinking, how in the world, what does that mean? A time, times, and half a time? And how will I ever understand that? But it's really pretty simple. The Hebrew language has singular, dual, and then plural. So you can say one thing in Hebrew, you can say two things in Hebrew, or you can say more than two, like three or many. So when it says time, that means one time. When it says times, that means two times. Okay, so one time and two times, put all that together and we got three times. And then a half a time means basically we're dealing with 3.5 times, which, as we're going to see from other conversion factors in the Bible, represents 3.5 years. So a time, times, and half a time. One time, two times, that's three times, and a half a time, 3.5 years. Okay, so this little horn is going to prevail over the saints for a finite period. It's going to seem like an eternity for those that are suffering under the oppression, but it is finite. Now, elsewhere in scripture, specifically in Daniel, this is going to be repeated. In Daniel 12:7, it shall be for a time, times, and in half. That's again 3.5 years. Now, if we go to Revelation, we can figure out how is that 3.5 years. It's going to be mentioned in Daniel 9. I don't have that passage here, but if we go to Revelation 12:14, that time, times, and half a time, that's the amount of time that the woman, who is Israel, flees into the wilderness and is kept safe in the wilderness during this time of the little horn. Okay, so the little horn prevails over the saints for that amount of time. The woman, Israel, is kept safe in the wilderness for that amount of time as well. Then Revelation 12:6 tells us that that is 1,203 score days, or 1,260 days. And then Revelation 13:5 tells us 42 months. So what we're looking at here is 1 month measured as 30 days. Okay, 42 times 30 gives us 1,260 days. That's going to be the same as 3.5 years. So this little horn will prevail over the saints for 3.5 years. Revelation 12:6 tells us that's also 1,260 days. Revelation 13:5 tells us that's 42 months. And I think we can get out of Daniel 9 that that's 3.5 years. Okay, so the little horn comes to power for 3.5 terrible years, or 42 months. Okay, everybody good so far? Okay, in verse 26, there is good news. Though this reign of the little horn is terrible and oppressive and murderous and blasphemous, the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. Remember last week when we were looking at the courtroom scene, we saw that the Ancient of Days was on the throne and thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days did sit. He is sitting in judgment. So this is kind of looping back to what we learned last week. The judgment shall sit, and they will take away his dominion. Remember the rock that's not cut out with human hands? It hits the statue, and the statue becomes like dust and blows away like it never was. That's essentially what happens at the end of the fourth beast as well. The judgment shall sit, and the time of the reign of the little horn comes to an end. Daniel 7:11 says, I beheld even till the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. So his rule comes to an end. His body is slain, given to the burning flame. And this is parallel with Revelation 19:20. The beast of Revelation is taken and also cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. So the little horn, the body being slain, cast into the burning flame, is parallel to the beast of Revelation. In addition to the false prophet, we're going to get more information from Revelation, being cast alive into the lake of fire. So their rule on earth comes to an end. That's the good news. Remember the short version? There's going to be 4 kings and then the saints win. At the end, the beast is slain and given over to judgment. In verse 27, we get the resolution of all things. The kingdom, the dominion, the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. And this is going to be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions will serve and obey him. So the kingdom and dominion is given to the people of the saints of the Most High. And last week in the courtroom scene, we saw that the Son of Man was given dominion, and his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. So the Son of Man, the Messiah, will rule over the saints and with the saints, and it will be the millennial kingdom on earth. And the saints will possess the kingdom. So the question is, who are the saints? Some will say the saints are only Israel. Some will say saints are only the church. But I think the saints of the Most High refers to the descendants, the natural descendants of Israel. The promises that God made to Israel will come to full fruition during the millennial reign, the land promises, the throne, all of that good stuff. But also, we're told that the Gentiles have been grafted in. And Paul makes the promise, and Jesus makes the promise in Revelation, that we will be ruling and reigning with him. So the saints of the Most High, in my opinion, are just the people of God. That is Israel. Those are the Gentiles grafted in, the church grafted in with Israel as well. Now, at the very end of that chapter, Daniel says, as for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me and my countenance changed. So his face changes and he's still concerned. I don't think that the bystander gave him a very satisfying explanation. He still doesn't understand everything, but it says that he kept the matters in his heart. When we do that, when we study the Bible and we keep the matters in our heart, we can meditate upon them, turn them over and over, compare them with different scriptures, and we begin to get more understanding the more that we meditate upon them. So that is Daniel chapter 7. How are we doing so far? Any questions, thoughts, concerns, ideas? Everybody good? Y'all still out there? Everybody good?
I have a
Okay.
question.
Yes, sir.
So when you say all the saints, you mean the Jews that come to the Jews that come to know Christ at the end times? You don't mean all Jews.
So the Jews that, so at the end of time in the tribulation, there's going to be different groups of Jews. There's going to be, if we look now, there are Jews, natural descendants of Israel, who already are Messianic Jews. That is, they believe in Jesus. So right now they're considered part of the church, part of the body of Christ. During the tribulation, there will be Jews that come to Christ. For example, the 144,000, those are ethnic Jews. They come to Christ during the tribulation, and they do the work of Christ during this time of trouble. But there will still be some at the end that don't recognize Jesus as Messiah until he returns to the earth. In Zechariah, it says, they will look upon me, the one they have pierced, and they will weep for me as they mourn for an only son. It's like Joseph's brothers in Egypt. It took them a while to recognize who Joseph was, but whenever they recognized who Joseph was, he treated them with kindness, and he provided for them and took care of them and never took retribution on them. So there will be natural descendants of the Jews who come to Christ during the tribulation, and they will pass over into the millennium and receive all of the promises that were given to Israel. But it is contingent upon recognizing Christ and being faithful to him and giving your allegiance to him and being obedient to him. It just happens at different times for the Jews. It happens at different times for the Gentiles as well. There will be Gentiles also coming to Christ during the tribulation as well. Do you have anything to add there? Did I miss something, Kim Tally?
I have something.
Okay.
And Kim, I remember you teaching on this in a Sunday school, and it really impacted me. And you talked about how Jesus Christ is the center of the timeline. And before his life, everybody who loved God and was looking forward to the Messiah were God's people and would be saved because they were looking forward to the Messiah. Now then, during Jesus's life, there were those who rejected him, and since then there have been those who rejected him as Messiah. But the faith of us looking back to his life, that our faith makes us justified, and their faith looking forward as Jews to the coming Messiah made them justified as well. Is that a correct understanding, do you
Yeah,
think?
their faith made them righteous. What God revealed of himself, Noah or Abraham, it says their faith was reckoned unto them as righteousness. I think what helped me with that is C.S. Lewis says the cross works both ways. It works future, like for saving us, and works in the past. It's retroactive as well. Would you say that how that fits in, Shannon?
Yes, I think so. And I think maybe what you're commenting on here, how is it that all Israel will be saved?
Yeah,
Because
that comment. Mm-hmm.
that's an important thing to think about. When Jesus returns, like we saw in Daniel 7, the judgment sits. Whenever we look at Christ coming with the clouds with power and great glory in Revelation 1, they will weep and wail because of him. He's coming with judgment. And we know that whenever he returns, there's going to be the sheep and goats judgment, right? That's not the Bema seat. That's not the reward for believers. That's Jesus coming back and judging the nations. Those nations that were fighting against him, the goats, they don't get to go forward into the millennium. But those that were for him, that were taking care of his people, Israel, his brethren, those nations will be allowed to pass forward into the millennium. So he comes with judgment and he draws a line in the sand. And it makes me think of King Solomon. When King Solomon arose to David's throne, he went back and he took care of a lot of unfinished business that David didn't take care of. There were enemies of David that Solomon came back and said, okay, this is now your judgment, this is your punishment. You know, whether he was going to let them stay alive or stay in Jerusalem, whatever, he brought judgment when he ascended to David's throne. And Jesus will do that as well. He comes with judgment, he separates the sheep and goat nations, and then he sets up his kingdom. And that's the rock, knock it out with human hands, growing into a mountain and filling the whole earth. But there will be a point when all Israel, national Israel, will recognize Jesus as Messiah and be saved and be the head of the nations in the millennial kingdom, as far as my understanding goes.
So the Jews that are alive at that time, not Jews from the past, because I think people confuse the chosenness of Israel as a element that God uses. That doesn't mean they're chosen to be saved as far as an entire race, right?
Right.
Okay.
You know, it's still contingent upon Messiah.
Right. There you go. Yeah.
But the promises that he made to them will be fulfilled, have been fulfilled, are being fulfilled, and will be fulfilled. And they are chosen because they are prominent. They're not chosen because he's going to say, I'm going to save you just because you're a Jew.
Yeah.
The contingency is still faith.
That's good.
Oh.
Can I ask one more question?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm a newcomer. Do you think those four kingdoms, represent all of human history? And if so, where does Western civilization fit in as far as Europe and America? Is that part of Rome or what?
So we talked about that a little bit last week, and we see definite correlations between the four beasts and the empires represented by the metal statue. And I think I lean that way. I think that is correct. Some have taught that the four beasts correspond to modern nations, that The lion with eagle's wings is the lion is the symbol of Great Britain. The eagle's wings are torn off. That becomes the United States. That's given the heart of a man and it stands on its feet. So some would use that to point to Great Britain and USA. The bear, of course, Russia. The leopard with four heads, that's the Germany, and the four phases or the four Reichs, and the wings of the fowl points to France. And then the fourth beast is the end times new world global government order. Okay. And so some have posed that. My only objection is that what's the second witness in the Bible? Where else can we say, oh yeah, that's USA? But Daniel 2 gives us those nations. And as the story of Daniel develops, we see Babylon turning into Medo-Persia. Then we're going to read about, the conquest of Alexander the Great. So Daniel 2 sets the precedent that helps us interpret Daniel 7. So I think that it goes from Nebuchadnezzar to Christ. And it's interesting to consider possibly that those point to modern nations, and that may be a possibility. And even next week when we talk about Daniel 8, the ram and the he-goat, the ram points to Persia, the he-goat points to Germany, but some people say, oh, that's modern day Iran and modern day Greece, which is definitely a possibility. But all of the end times passages in the Bible, Gog, Magog, the king of the north and the south in Daniel 11, those are Middle Eastern, Israel-centric empires. And we want to place ourselves in the middle of all of that because we're Americans, right?
Yeah.
So it's possible that we fit in, but everything is very Israel-centric. And there's the interpretation that the Antichrist is European, and there's the interpretation that he's Middle Eastern. And both of those interpretations come from Daniel 9. In Daniel 9, it says, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, those were Romans that destroyed the city and the sanctuary in 70 AD. So people say, well, because the people that destroyed the temple were Romans, the Antichrist must be European. So there's that interpretation. But if you look at who the soldiers actually were that came in and destroyed the temple, they were hires from Syria. So they came from the region of the north. They were Middle Eastern people, ethnic people. And so you can also say, well, from that very same passage, we can apply that to a Middle Eastern Antichrist, maybe from the region of Syria or Turkey, somewhere north of Israel. So those two branches come from the same passage. Which one is it? Well, we'll see. The one that is most Israel-centric is probably the correct one. The one that you see in different places in the Bible, Ezekiel 38 and 39, Daniel 11, Daniel 9, all of the traditional, classic, historical is enemies of Israel, I believe. So.
Wow, fascinating. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, that was probably more than you wanted to hear.
No, that was very helpful. My wife left, so maybe I embarrassed her. Pray for me.
Well, she'll just go get some more animals in the house. Okay, y'all, that's probably a good place to stop because we're fixing to tread into Revelation, and those aren't easy passages. So let's go ahead and stop there for the night. I don't think I can do the rest in 6 minutes, and then we will continue next week.